Welcome back to Dark Horror Narrations, the channel where every rules-based horror story is told in a real human voice with no shortcuts. Thank you for spending your evening with me tonight. Your presence here means more than you know. Tonight's story takes place in the French Quarter of New Orleans, and I'd like to make sure you're settled in before we begin. Before we start, tell me something in the comments. What is the most uncomfortable place you have ever stayed overnight, and what made it wrong? I read these, and I'm curious what the overlap is. The handwritten card on the fridge said to sign the leather ledger on the mantle. The folded paper tucked into the back of the leather ledger said not to. I was standing in the parlor of the cottage with both pieces of paper in my hands, my signature still fresh on the first blank page of the book, the ink barely dry. I had been inside the house for less than 30 minutes. The card was a small rectangle of cream stock with the host's number at the top, propped against a bottle of sparkling water in the fridge door. Guests are welcome to add their name to continue the house's history. Many have done so. Handwritten in a loose, easy hand. The folded paper was different. It had been pressed flat between the back cover and the end paper of the ledger for what looked like a very long time. The fold marks were worn soft, the corners rounded, the creases dark from long pressure. The cursive on it was tight and careful, the kind of penmanship nobody learns anymore. Rules for guests of the house at 1114 Burgundy Street. Please read before sunset. 6 rules, numbered in Roman numerals, and the 5th one, in the same cursive hand, said plainly not to write in the leather pharmacy ledger on the mantle under any circumstances. It was for display only. I read Rule 5 twice. Then I looked at my signature on the first blank page of the ledger, Nathan Alcott, November 7th, 2026. The ink was the black of a standard ballpoint, the date in my own handwriting. My name sat on the page the way a fresh boot print sits in snow. I was 37 years old, with a doctorate in American history and 8 years of archival experience. And it took me a long minute of staring at the open ledger before I could think about anything other than the signature. The cottage had come up in my searches 3 weeks earlier, when I was building an itinerary for a 5-day research trip to the notarial archives here in the city. I was finishing the manuscript of my second book, a study of property transfers among free people of color in antebellum Louisiana between 1820 and 1860. The book was under contract with the press at LSU, and I had one chapter left that I could not close without looking at specific transaction records in person. The archivist I had been corresponding with had pulled the call slips for me in advance. I had 5 days. I needed a place in the quarter within walking distance of the archives, quiet enough to work in the evenings, not costing the kind of money tourist properties charge during the last week of the season. The listing had been mid-range. $180 a night, a private Creole cottage on Burgundy Street between Ursulines and Governor Nichols, hosted by someone named Camille. The photograph showed a building with pale yellow stucco, green shutters, a small interior courtyard with brick paving and potted lemon trees, and a ground floor parlor that had clearly once been a shop. The listing text mentioned the cottage had been built in 1834 and had operated as an apothecary from the mid-1830s until the 1870s. Some of the original cast-iron shelving remained in the back parlor, repurposed now as bookshelves. There was no hot tub, no pool, no concierge service. It was a house in the quarter with history in it, which was what I wanted. I had booked it for the nights of November 7th through the 11th. I paid the deposit. I drove down from Baton Rouge that morning, got in around 3:30 in the afternoon, parked my truck in a public lot near the French Market because the cottage had no dedicated parking, and walked the 4 blocks carrying my overnight bag and my laptop. The light in the quarter in early November has a particular honey color in the late afternoon, warm and low, and the shadows on the stucco walls had started to turn purple by the time I reached the iron gate of 1114 Burgundy. The gate was unlocked. That was the first thing I should have noticed, but I was tired and the host message had said the lockbox code would get me through the gate and then through the front door. So I reached for the keypad on reflex. Before I saw the latch was already open. I pushed the gate inward. It swung on hinges that had been well oiled, and the sound was clean. I stepped into a narrow brick passage between the street and the cottage's front stoop, and the smell of the quarter followed me for about 2 steps before another smell replaced it, something herbal and dry and older than anything the city usually carries. The front door had a lockbox on it after all, mounted beside the handle with the code Camille had given me. I punched the code in, retrieved the key, let myself into the parlor. The cottage was a classic Creole plan, one narrow room deep at the front, a second room behind it, and a small kitchen at the back. The ceilings were taller than I expected, maybe 14 feet, with old plaster medallions and wide pine floorboards worn smooth in the paths people walked most often. The front parlor had a tiled fireplace on the west wall, a pair of wingback chairs, a writing desk under the window. The walls were pale green, the color of old bills. The cast iron shelving the listing had promised ran along the east wall of the back parlor, black painted and heavy, its pharmacy drawers now filled with books and a few ceramic pieces. A narrow staircase tucked behind the back parlor climbed to the sleeping loft above. French doors at the rear of the kitchen opened onto the courtyard. The fridge had the welcome card I mentioned: sparkling water, 3 beers, a carton of milk, a plate of beignets under plastic wrap. The card directed me to the mantle. I crossed to the parlor and found the ledger, where she had said it would be, open on a small wooden stand with a leather bookmark hanging between 2 pages. Beside it stood a brass oil lamp and a framed daguerreotype of an older woman, severe, unsmiling, hair drawn back hard against her skull. Below the photograph, a small card in old handwriting read E. Marchand, proprietress, 1844. I opened the ledger to the first blank page after the last signature. The last entry was from someone named Priya Narayan, dated 2 weeks earlier, who had written, "Beautiful place, thank you," and signed in a round, relaxed hand. There were hundreds of signatures stretching back across the filled pages in front of hers, some dated from this year, some from last year, some from the year before. The handwriting, the pens, the styles of people who had stayed. I signed my name below the last empty line with the pen clipped to my jacket pocket. Nathan Alcott. November 7th, 2026. I closed the ledger and took my bag upstairs. The sleeping loft was small. A queen bed under the sloped ceiling, a nightstand, a dresser, a window overlooking the courtyard. I unpacked, hung my 2 shirts, laid out my notebooks and laptop on the writing desk downstairs, checked the water pressure in the ground floor bathroom, started a kettle for coffee. It was, by then, around 4:45, and the light outside had dropped another shade toward evening. I had intended to spend the first hour settling in, then walk to the archives building and do a preliminary site visit before it closed. That was my plan. I had the plan written in my notebook. I came back into the parlor to pick up my notebook and glanced at the mantle as I passed, and the ledger caught my eye, because I am a historian and old books catch my eye on reflex. I picked it up. I opened it to my fresh signature. I thought about the binding. I ran my thumb along the inside of the back cover out of habit, checking the hinge, and felt the fold of paper tucked into the spine where the end paper met the cover. I teased it out with my fingernail and unfolded it, and that is where the hook ends, with me standing on the worn pine of the parlor floor holding a handwritten rule card that told me not to do the thing I had done 10 minutes before. Rule 1. Do not speak your full name aloud inside the house after sunset. If you speak to anyone, introduce yourself only by your given name. Do not offer family names. Do not offer your middle name. Do not state your date of birth aloud. Rule 2. The glass of water on the altar in the back parlor has been set. Do not move it. Do not drink from it. If you find it has gone cloudy or bubbled by morning, do not drink from the tap that day. Drink only from sealed bottles. Rule 3. Between 2 and 4 in the morning, you may hear the front gate open, footsteps in the courtyard, or someone calling from the far side of the French doors. Do not go to the courtyard window. Do not open the French doors. Do not call back. Rule 4. If you find a folded white paper anywhere in the house, on a pillow, under a cup, on a shelf, in your pocket. Do not read what is written on it. Do not burn it. Do not throw it away. Place it in the blue ceramic jar on the kitchen shelf and close the lid. Rule 5. Do not write in the leather pharmacy ledger on the mantle under any circumstances. It is for display only. Rule 6. Should you break any rule, write the transgression on the final page of the ledger before midnight. Confession may grant mercy. Silence will not. I read the 6 rules twice. My pulse had gone up in a way I was aware of but not yet alarmed by. I had done fieldwork in places that unsettled me before. I had read documents in archives that unsettled me. I had learned early that unsettled was a physical state that did not always track with danger. I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth, and looked at the ledger again, and then at the rule card, and then at my watch. 4:53. My first instinct was that this was staged. Some Airbnb hosts built atmosphere around their properties, particularly historic ones in the quarter. A folded card of rules in a pharmacy ledger was the kind of thing a host might plant to charm academic guests like me. Except the rules contradicted the welcome card, and hosts do not usually build atmosphere around a contradiction they did not write themselves. The welcome card was in Camille's handwriting. The rules were in a different hand entirely, old cursive, the letters formed by someone who had learned to write before modern paper came into common use. The difference between the two hands was not the kind of difference a single person produces by trying. It was the difference between two people separated by well over a century. I set both cards on the mantle and looked at the framed daguerreotype. The older woman, E. Marchand, proprietress, 1844. The pharmacy had been owned by a free woman of color, then, at least at that point in its history. I knew the name vaguely. Marchand was common in Creole property records of the period. I would need to check my files. But the photograph and the name and the handwriting on the rule card were all consistent with a document from the 1840s or 1850s, which was a period I had spent the better part of 2 years living inside of professionally. The folded paper was not from 1844. The paper itself was modern wood pulp stock, mid-20th century at the earliest. Someone had transcribed something older onto newer paper, or someone had learned to write in that old hand and was using modern stock. Either way, this was not something Camille had placed in the book casually as atmosphere. I had broken Rule 5. I had written my name in the ledger. I had also technically spoken my full name aloud inside the house, because I had called my wife Nathan Alcott checking in from the cottage when I came through the front door and the call had gone to voicemail. It was not sunset yet by the rule card standard, but sunset was maybe an hour and a half away, and I had no way to retroactively unsay my name. I was 0 for 2 already, and I had not even unpacked my toothbrush. I picked up the rule card and took it and the ledger into the kitchen and sat down at the small round table under the French doors. I set the 2 documents in front of me side by side and looked at them. This was the point at which a different kind of guest would have put the cards back and gone out for a drink on Burgundy Street and told themselves it was an old house, and old houses had old stories attached to them. I was not that kind of guest. I am trained to find patterns in paper. When paper shows me something that does not add up, I do not put the paper down. I read more paper. The bookshelves in the back parlor held a mix of old volumes and modern paperbacks and a few ceramic pieces. I had noticed when I first came in that most of the older volumes were what you would expect from a former pharmacy: medical texts, herbal guides, books on cholera and fever and the diseases of the tropics, standard decorative objects for a house that played on its history. But one of the cast iron drawers below the shelves had a small brass pull and no label, and the other drawers all had labels. I had registered this on my first walkthrough and not thought about it. Now I went back and I pulled the drawer. Inside was a thin notebook, plain black cloth cover, maybe 150 pages. The first page said house history in neat print, and below that a note in the same hand as the welcome card on the fridge. Guests are welcome to add their impressions of the cottage here. Many have recorded wonderful stories of their stays. Camille's hand again. The pages behind were full of entries dated across several years, Couples, solo travelers, a few families, the usual range. A woman from Atlanta had written about the way the courtyard smelled at dawn. A man from Toronto had sketched the front facade. A couple from Charleston had stayed 4 nights in the summer and described how the cottage had felt like a pocket of cool air in the middle of the city's heat. I turned the pages forward through the entries, cross-referencing dates with the signatures in the ledger to see if the two matched. Mostly they did. Some guests had signed the ledger and written in the notebook. Some had only signed the ledger. A few had only written in the notebook. The 2 documents tracked each other roughly but not perfectly. 11 pages into the notebook, I found an entry that did not read like the others. The handwriting was rushed, the lines slanting hard downhill. The date at the top was October 20th of the current year, 2.5 weeks before my arrival. It was signed E. Castellan. Beautiful cottage, rich history. Spent my first night well, slept through. Second morning, I found a folded piece of paper on my pillow that I had not put there. I read it before I saw the rule card. It had my mother's maiden name written on it in old cursive. My mother passed in 2019. I do not know who would know her maiden name. I do not know who would write it in a hand that old. I am leaving a day early. I would not recommend this property to anyone who is sensitive to atmosphere. Please, if you are reading this before you have done anything else in the house, do not sign the ledger on the mantle. Read the folded card inside the back cover first. I am sorry I did not. E. Castellan. I stared at that entry for a long time. E. Castellan. Elliot Castellan was a name I knew slightly, an investigative journalist based in the Gulf region who had written a long feature 2 years ago on Louisiana property archives for a national outlet. I had cited him once in a footnote. He was exactly the kind of person who would book this cottage for research reasons, the way I had. He had stayed here 2.5 weeks ago. He had broken Rule 4, and then he had warned the next guest about Rule 5, which meant he had survived long enough to write the warning. I turned the page. The next entry was dated 3 weeks after my arrival, November 28th of this year. The handwriting was different. A woman named Amelia Bro had written about driving down from Lafayette to check on her colleague Elliot Castellan, who had stopped returning messages after his stay at the cottage in October. She had booked the same rental because it was the last place anyone knew he had been. She described arriving in the late afternoon, finding the house much as he had described, finding the folded rule card inside the ledger, finding his warning in the notebook, and her own decision to stay anyway because she wrote she had been a crime reporter for 14 years and she did not scare easily. Her entry was 4 pages long. In the last page, the handwriting changed quality, became less controlled. The final paragraph read, I found a folded paper on the floor by the fireplace tonight. It has my father's name on it in old cursive. I cannot find the blue ceramic jar on the kitchen shelf. There is no jar. She has lied about the jar. I do not know who she is, but she has lied about the jar. If anyone reads this, the rules are. The sentence stopped there. I turned the page. The next entry was dated December 10th. A man named Jordan Fontaine. He was looking for Amelia Bro. I kept turning. There was an entry dated January, 2 in February, 3 in March, 1 in April. The last full entry was dated late April of next year, written by someone who identified herself only as a city archivist. Property closed to short-term rental, pending municipal investigation. 14 persons reported missing in connection with this address since late October of the previous year. Investigation ongoing. I counted 14 people after Elliot Castellan, 15 with him, 16 with me. I closed the notebook. My hands were steady. That steadiness surprised me in the same way it would have surprised me if I had picked up a hot pan without feeling the burn. I was standing in a rented cottage in the French Quarter with a document in my hands that appeared to contain a sequence of future disappearances fanning out from this exact moment, and my hands were steady because I have spent 15 years reading documents in rooms where the paper was older than the country, and I had learned somewhere along the line not to let the paper move me faster than I wanted to move. I checked my watch. 5:26. The light in the courtyard had gone from honey to the deeper gold of the last half hour before sunset. I walked to the front door and tried my cell. 1 bar, then none. I walked to the sidewalk outside the gate, 2 bars. I called Camille's number. It went to voicemail. I left a short message saying I had arrived and had some questions about the property and asked her to call me back at her earliest convenience. I called my colleague at LSU, a woman named Rashida Bell, who knew my itinerary and would expect to hear from me in a few days. She did not pick up. I left her a voicemail saying I was in the quarter, the research was going well, and if she did not hear from me by Tuesday afternoon, she should contact campus security and give them the address of the cottage. I made that voicemail a tone lighter than it needed to be so she would not worry immediately but would take the address seriously if I missed my check-in. That was probably the clearest-headed thing I did that entire week. I went back into the cottage and locked the front door behind me. The altar in the back parlor was easy to find. A small wooden shelf mounted between 2 windows, the wood unfinished, dark with age. On it sat a glass tumbler half full of water, a small palm frond cross tied with red thread, a brown glass apothecary bottle, a sprig of something dried that had once been lavender. The water was clear. I did not move the glass. I did not drink from it. I went to the kitchen and checked the shelf on the side wall where Amelia Bro had said there was no blue ceramic jar. There was a blue ceramic jar on the shelf, a small lidded piece of rookwood stoneware the color of a summer storm. I did not open it. I noted its existence and went on. I turned on every lamp in the cottage. There were 7 of them. The oil lamp on the mantle was the 8th, and I left it unlit for now. I sat down at the writing desk in the front parlor with the house history notebook, the rule card, and the ledger lined up in front of me. I pulled my laptop out of my bag and opened my research files. I had a folder of scans from the notarial archives that I had made in a previous visit 2 years earlier, property transfers in the lower quarter through the 1850s, and I started searching them for 1114 Burgundy Street. The address came up twice in my files. The first transfer, in 1834, recorded the sale of the undeveloped lot from a man named Jean-Baptiste Toureau to a woman listed as Eulalie Marchand Femme de Couleur Libre, free woman of color. The second transfer, in 1854, recorded the sale of the property from the estate of Eulalie Marchand to a buyer named Lucien Aubert. The intervening 20 years were blank in my files. That was unusual. I had expected to see at least one refinancing, one servitude, one boundary dispute. Creole property records from this period were usually dense. But Eulalie Marchand had built and operated the pharmacy for 20 years without generating a single transactional record, and then her estate had sold it in 1854. I checked the notations I had made 2 years earlier when I scanned these files. My own handwriting in the margin read, Marchand, apothecary on Burgundy, records sparse, possibly destroyed in 1884 fire. I had meant to follow up. I had not. I had moved on to other properties that were more central to my argument. I had remembered this address, actually, on the long drive down, somewhere on the bridge at Baton Rouge, thinking about where to stay in the quarter. I had remembered an address from those old notes and searched for it on the rental site and found Camille's listing at exactly that location. I had told myself at the time that this was a coincidence and had felt quietly pleased with myself for spotting it. I had booked the cottage in part because I wanted to see the building I had failed to write about, which meant, in a way that I did not want to examine yet, that I had sought this place out. I kept reading. The bookshelves, the cast iron drawers, the handwriting on the daguerreotype card, the Marchand name and the transfer records, all of it aligning. I went back to the cast iron drawer where I had found the house history notebook and pulled the drawer all the way out to check if anything else was inside. There was a folded square of dark cloth at the back. I lifted it out. Inside the cloth was a small book, older than anything I had touched so far, bound in cracked brown leather and tied shut with faded ribbon, no label on the spine. I undid the ribbon. The pages were cream-laid paper, hand-ruled with brown ink. The dates on the first entries were from 1853. The handwriting was a woman's, small, cramped, the letters leaning slightly left. I took the book to the writing desk, sat down under the lamp, and started reading. The diary began with a funeral. Eulalie Marchand had died in the yellow fever epidemic of 1853. The diarist was her elder daughter, Félicité, aged 22, who had inherited the pharmacy and, she explained in the second entry, the book that sat on the mantle. Mother kept an account book, Félicité wrote, in which she recorded prescriptions and payments. She told me before she died that the book was also a working, bound to our blood and to this house. She told me I would understand this once I read through to the end and looked at the last page. I read through. The last page was a list of names. I counted 112 names, each with a date beside it, each in Mother's hand. The earliest date was from 1837, 3 years after she came here. The latest was a week before she died. I have been standing at the writing desk for an hour looking at this book, and I do not know what I am supposed to do with it. I turned pages. Félicité was methodical. She went through her mother's papers, reconstructed the pattern. The account book recorded prescriptions for customers who paid cash. But certain customers, Félicité realized, had not paid cash. They had paid in something else. They had come in asking for a specific kind of help, the kind free women of color in the quarter sometimes provided outside the frame of licensed medicine, old workings, root work, names written on paper and folded, petition papers tucked into bottles, and their names, on payment, went into the account book alongside everyone else's. Over time, the distinction between a medical customer and a working customer blurred in the book's pages. The book had learned to use any signature. There was a passage from 1853, late in the year, that I had to read 3 times. Mother used Thérèse as the root. She did not tell me until after, and by then Thérèse had been dead for 14 years, and there was no undoing. I remember the summer Thérèse was 8. She was my younger sister. One night Mother said Therese had a fever that had turned, and we wrapped her and carried her to the courtyard, where Mother said the air was cleaner, and Mother sent me inside for water. When I came back, Thérèse was gone. Mother told me the fever had taken her while I was in the kitchen. I did not question it. I was 13. I grieved. We held a small service. There was no body to bury. Mother said the city had taken it to the cemetery in the night, a common thing during fever months. I believed her. I believed her for 14 years. Last week, after Mother's funeral, I went into the courtyard and lifted the cap of the old cistern because I needed to check whether we had water reserved for the season. The cistern is dry. It has been dry since the city plumbing came through in the 1840s. Mother had walled off the western chamber of the cistern with brick in 1839. She told me then that she had sealed it because the stone was failing and water was leaking sideways into the earth. I never questioned this. I was a child. Last week I climbed down and looked at the brick wall and realized the mortar was salt set, not lime set. Mother had been a chemist. She knew the difference. Lime mortar is for building. Salt mortar is for binding. I broke out the bricks. Thérèse is inside. She has been inside since she was 8 years old. Mother laid her with her feet toward the western wall and her skull turned toward a small wooden box. I have not opened the box. I think I know what is in it. I think it is the working that Mother bound to our blood and to this house with my sister's body as the root. I am 22 years old, and I have just learned that my mother used my little sister as a foundation stone. I do not know what to do. There were more pages. Félicité wrote about her attempts to understand the working. She wrote about customers who came back asking for things. She wrote about the way the book on the mantle began to feel heavier when she picked it up, and the way the names inside it began to shift slightly between readings, as though settling. She wrote about writing the rule card. I have done what I can, she wrote, to give guests of the house a chance. I wrote down 6 rules and folded them into the back of the book so that anyone who stays will find them before sunset. I told myself the rules would protect them. I have come to understand the rules differently now. The book has learned from them. It has learned that rules create engagement, that following instructions is a kind of transaction. Every transaction deepens the mark. I have made the book better at catching people. I did not understand this until recently, and by then the pattern was set, and guests had been coming and going from this house for months, and some had not gone. The final entry in Felicity's diary was dated the 14th of November, 1854. The handwriting was faster than her earlier entries, rougher. I am going down to the cistern tonight, she wrote. I will find the small wooden box at the root of the brick wall. I will open it. I will find Mother's original working inside. I will sever it, if I can. I will write the severance myself, using the language Mother taught me as a child. 3 pillars: blood, land, hunger. If the 3 are written away, the binding dissolves. If I fail, the binding shifts its weight, and the one who attempted severance becomes the carrier. Mother explained this to me in the last week of her life as a warning. She was very clear that the carrier must be someone already marked by the book. Mother was afraid the carrier would be me. I believe it will be one way or the other. I have decided I would rather carry it than leave it loose. There is no one else. The entry ended there. The pages after it were blank. I sat back in my chair. Felicite had gone down to the cistern and had not come back as herself. The property had transferred to Lucien Aubert in 1854, which was consistent with Felicite having disappeared that same year, which meant that whatever she had tried, it had not fully worked. The book was still on the mantle. The rule card was still tucked in its binding. Guests had gone on coming and going, and the transfers had gone on happening, and the notebook in the drawer had gone on collecting its entries. And here I was, 172 years later, with a fresh signature on the first blank page, and the air in the parlor going still around me. My watch said 6:47. The sun had gone down. The lamps I had turned on were the only light. Something moved in the courtyard, not a footstep exactly, a soft scrape of fabric against brick, the way a long hem sounds when it drags across a rough surface. I looked up from the diary. The French doors at the back of the kitchen were closed. Through the glass I could see the courtyard lit only by the spill of light from the kitchen window, the brick paving, the 2 lemon trees in their pots, the stone cap of the cistern. The cap was uneven. When I had walked through the cottage earlier, the marble slab over the cistern had been flush with the brick. Now one corner of it was raised maybe an inch, as though something beneath it had pushed up and settled back without quite returning to true. I watched for a full minute. Nothing moved. The slab did not settle further. I did not go outside. I walked to the mantel instead and picked up the leather ledger. The oil lamp beside it was full. There were matches in a small tin on the hearth. I did not light the lamp. The rule card had not told me to light it. The rule card had told me not to write in the ledger. I was already past that. I did not know which rules were worth following now, and I did not want to guess wrong. I set the ledger down and picked up a pen from the writing desk. I went back to the kitchen, opened the house history notebook to the last blank page, and pressed the pen to the paper. The nib left no mark. I pressed harder. Nothing. I tried a ballpoint from my bag. Nothing. I tried a pencil. I tried pressing hard enough to leave a groove from pressure alone. The paper showed no impression. I went to the mantel ledger and opened it to the last blank page. I pressed the same pen to the same place. Nothing. I scratched the nib across my palm and saw a line of ink come up. I went back to the ledger. Nothing. The ledger held my signature on the first blank page. Fresh, clean, accepting. The ledger would not accept a confession. That was when I understood, as clearly as I had understood any archival document in my career, that Rule 6 was not real. Rule 6 had never been available. Felicite had written it because she needed to fill a 6th slot with something that looked like mercy. The rules were a lure. I had already been marked when I signed, and the mark could not be removed by writing, because the mark was a signature, and the book did not let you write past it. The book wanted you engaged. The book wanted you trying. The book wanted you walking around the cottage following rules 1 through 5 with hope in your chest, because hope kept you here, and being here was how it closed. I sat at the kitchen table and tried to think past the pulse moving in my neck. The diary had said 3 pillars: blood, land, hunger. Felicie had gone down to the cistern and tried to sever them and had failed, or partially succeeded, or shifted the carrier. Whatever had happened, it had not freed the guests who came after her, which meant severance was possible but difficult, and the details mattered, and she had not lived to explain them. The scrape came from the courtyard again, longer this time, a slow drag, across brick, maybe 3 seconds. I stood up and walked to the French doors and did not open them. Through the glass, in the faint light that reached the courtyard from the kitchen, I saw the slab over the cistern lift fully and slide aside, slow and smooth, as though pushed by a hand from below that had no body weight behind it but plenty of patience. The black square of the open cistern sat flat against the brick. A figure came up out of it. She was small, thin, in a dark dress with a high collar and long sleeves. Her hair was drawn back tightly. She looked somewhere around 22 years old. She climbed out of the cistern using the steps I now saw were set into its inner wall, moving without effort, and she stood on the courtyard bricks and turned her face toward the kitchen window, and even from across the courtyard I could see that her skin had the faint grain of old paper. I did not open the doors. I did not call out. I stood with my hand flat against the glass, 6 feet from her, and watched her walk across the courtyard toward me in a straight line without hurry. She reached the French doors and stood on the other side of them, and her eyes met mine through the glass. She was beautiful in the way old daguerreotypes can be beautiful, a settled face, a steady gaze, no performance in her at all. Her lips moved, and I heard her voice quite clearly, as though the glass were not between us. "You found the diary," she said. "Good. That saves time. Will you let me in, please? The doors are on your side of the binding, not mine. I cannot open them from the courtyard." Her voice had the flat quiet of a room where no one has raised their voice in a long time. I looked at her for another moment and considered what a rational person would do, and then I reached down and turned the latch and pulled the French doors open. She came into the kitchen and stood at the opposite side of the table from me. She did not sit. Up close, her skin was unmistakable, not pale flesh, but something with a faint weave in it, like the tooth of cold-pressed paper. The veins showing through at her temples and along the backs of her hands, the way fine text shows through the back of a thin page held to a lamp. When she parted her lips to speak again, I saw small writing along the inner surface of her teeth, dense and overlapping, shifting slightly as her jaw moved. "My name is Félicite Marchand," she said. "I have been in this house since the 14th of November, 1854. The binding took me when I tried to sever it. I have been asked by the book to serve the rules to each guest since then. I have made a point of coming up to speak with the guests whose signatures interest it most. You are one of those. I am sorry for your situation." I did not answer right away. The quiet in the kitchen was the kind you get in museum storage rooms, a tempered stillness that makes your own breathing seem loud. "I read forward in the house history," I said finally. 15 people after me are recorded as coming here. Then a property closure. Is that fixed?" "The 15 are fixed," she said. "The moment you read their entries, their paths bend toward this house. The book does not need to know why. Curiosity, coincidence, search results, a friend mentioning a cottage in the quarter, any of these will bring them. They will come because they will come. Elliot Castellan has already been here, so his entry is settled in a different way, but the others will arrive." I said his name aloud. "Elliot Castellan." She nodded. "He left the cottage alive. He did not make it past the airport. His entry was already writing itself when he drove away. The book does not need to keep people in the house to finish them. The house is where the mark is made. After that, the mark travels with the person." I said, "How many?" She looked at the ledger on the mantle in the front parlor through the doorway. She looked back at me. 3,412, she said. "That is my count since my mother's death in 1853. There is an older count from before I began keeping records. I do not know the full number. It is larger than I would like to say." I sat down. She did not. She stood at the table with her paper-fine hands resting on the back of the chair opposite mine, not gripping, simply laid on the wood. "The diary says 3 pillars," I said. blood, land, hunger. Walk me through the exact language of severance. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I will, but I want to say something else first. You have already signed the ledger on the mantle. That matters. The book will not let you simply walk out of the cottage tomorrow morning. It has your name. It will find you where the 15 after you will be found. Whatever you do, the only outcome in which you survive in any meaningful sense is severance, and severance requires the person who attempts it to be marked. The book will not accept an unmarked severance. You qualify. You qualified the moment you signed. I thought about that. There was a pattern in it that felt familiar from old legal texts, the way sovereignty could only be renounced by the sovereign, the way binding language often required the bound party to be the one to speak the release. The book behaved like a contract. Tell me the language, I said. She recited it. 3 sentences. To be written without lifting the pen, without pausing, without allowing silence to fall between them. The first released the Marchand bloodline from any obligation to the binding, named Felicite as free, declared the bloodline anchor severed. The second dissolved the claim of the ledger on the cottage and on any land anywhere, declared the land anchor dissolved. The third revoked the book's capacity to write futures, declared the hunger ended, released all claimed souls to rest. Written on which book? I asked. Not the one on the mantle, she said. That one is a copy, a catch. The original is in the cistern, in the small wooden box below my sister's bones. You will find the box when you break through the west wall of the cistern's inner chamber. Do not touch the book before you write. Do not let it touch you for any longer than the pen touches the page. Do not pause in the writing. The binding listens for the gap between sentences, and if the gap is long enough, it will find a way into it. I asked what would happen to her if I succeeded. She looked at the kitchen wall above my head for a moment before she answered. I have been here 172 years, she said. I would like to rest. My bones are in the same chamber as my sister's. Mother laid me there after I failed. I have been a thin shape in this courtyard and in these rooms for longer than is reasonable. If you succeed, I will finish. That is the word I have for it. Finish. I asked what would happen to me if I failed. The binding prefers a single carrier, she said. It has me. If you attempt severance and the severance does not complete cleanly, the binding will shift. It will release me and settle into you. You will take my place. You will stand in this kitchen in 172 years, explaining this to the person who signed the ledger in 2200. That is the failure state I have been warning carriers against since I began this work. I have failed to prevent 15 attempts in that time. I do not know the outcome of the 16th. She did not say it with weight. She said it the way a docent reads a plaque. I appreciated that. It meant she was not trying to frighten me into a decision. She was giving me the shape of the choice. I looked at my watch. It was 7:19. I had until midnight if Rule 6 had meant anything, which I now knew it had not, but there was still a logic to midnight as a deadline. The book's rhythms ran in the old ways. Things closed at the turn of the day. 4 hours and 41 minutes, enough time to break through brick if I had the right tools. I asked her about tools. She said there was a small toolbox under the kitchen sink that Camille kept stocked for minor repairs, probably with a hammer and a pry bar. There was also a fireplace iron in the parlor, heavy enough to work as a breaker. The brick of the inner wall was salt set, not lime set, and it would come apart more easily than it looked. She said I would need maybe an hour of work to open it. I went to the kitchen sink and opened the cabinet and found the toolbox. Hammer, pry bar, a small adjustable wrench, a box of screws. I took the hammer and the pry bar. I went to the fireplace and picked up the iron as well. I found a flashlight in the same cabinet, a heavy one with fresh batteries. She watched me without moving. When I came back into the kitchen, she said one more thing. The book will try to reach you while you are working, she said. It will send things into the cistern that look like sounds, or like voices, or like small physical shocks. It cannot harm you directly inside the chamber, because the chamber is below the binding surface, and its reach there is narrow. But it can confuse you. It can make the bricks seem heavier than they are. It can make the air seem thinner. Do not let the confusion slow the pen when you reach the original. You must write the 3 sentences without pause. If you pause, the binding will enter through the gap, and then it will not matter whether you finish the writing. I said I understood. She said, I am glad you are not afraid. I said I was afraid, but I was also a historian, and historians were used to sitting with unpleasant documents for long periods of time without leaving the room. She did not smile, but something moved at the corner of her mouth that I thought was close to a smile. Then she nodded and stepped back, and I went out through the French doors into the courtyard with the hammer in one hand and the pry bar in the other and the flashlight clipped to my belt, and I walked across the brick paving to the open cistern. The hole was darker than dark. The flashlight beam went down 6 feet or so and showed stone, the edge of a step set into the wall, then dropped off into shadow. The steps were the ones Felicite had come up. I tested the first one with my weight. It held. I went down slowly, one hand on the stone above my head, the other clutching the handle of the hammer. The chamber at the bottom was circular, maybe 8 feet across. The walls made of old field stone laid without mortar at the lower courses, and with lime mortar above. The air was cold and close and had no smell. My breath showed white in the flashlight beam. The chamber was dry. There was no water in the cistern. There had been no water in it for a very long time. The western wall was brick. I played the flashlight across it, 4 courses high, maybe 5 feet wide. The mortar between the bricks was a faint gray-white, different from the lime mortar on the stone above. I set the flashlight on a ledge that projected from the stone wall and pointed it at the brick. I took the pry bar and set the tip against the mortar at the edge of the top course and hit the end with the hammer. The mortar went to powder on the first strike. I tapped harder. The first brick worked loose in under a minute. I pulled it out and set it on the stone floor and moved to the next one. The second came out faster than the first. The third was stuck by a pocket of older mortar at its deeper edge and took 3 minutes. I worked steadily. My shoulders began to burn after the first 20 minutes. I did not stop. The book sent things into the chamber. Felicite had been right. A voice called my full name from very close to my left ear, inside the chamber. A voice that was not mine, and not hers, and not any voice I knew. It said Nathan Alcott twice, in a soft flat register, and I did not turn toward it. A handful of small scrapes sounded behind me on the stone floor, one after another, as though pebbles were being tossed at my heels. I did not turn. The flashlight flickered once and steadied. The air grew colder. I kept working. After 40 minutes, I had an opening 2 feet wide and 18 inches high in the center of the wall. I crouched and shone the flashlight through. The cavity beyond was shallow, maybe 2 feet deep, walled in fieldstone behind. On the floor of the cavity, laid with her feet toward the opening and her skull turned to the west, was a child's skeleton. Small, the bones clean and dry. Her arms had been crossed over her chest the way you fold a body for burial. Her skull was small and intact. There were 2 other skeletons beside her, larger, an adult female from the shape of the pelvis and the slimness of the ribs, laid in the same attitude, feet toward me. Felicite, I guessed. And one more, older, the long bones thicker. Possibly Eulalie, the mother who had sealed her daughter in the wall and been sealed into it herself, eventually, by someone. Possibly by Felicite, who had climbed back out of the cistern long enough to close the cistern back over her mother before being claimed. I did not have time to work out the sequence. In front of the 3 sets of bones, tucked between Therese's feet, was the box. It was small, about the size of a boot box, made of dark oak with iron hinges and an iron hasp that had turned black with age. I reached through the opening and lifted it out without touching the bones. I set it on the stone floor of the chamber behind me. I took the pen out of my pocket. Same pen that had marked my palm earlier. Same pen that had refused the final page of the ledger upstairs and the last page of the notebook. I did not touch the box yet. I held the pen in my left hand and reached forward with my right and undid the iron hasp and lifted the lid. Inside was a book, smaller than the ledger on the mantle, maybe 8 inches by 5, black and leather, The spine cracked in 2 places. The cover marked with carved letters that looked like letters but were not quite. The angles wrong in a way that made them hard to focus on. The book was warm. I felt the warmth from 4 inches away before my hand got close. It was the particular warmth of skin, a little above room temperature, with the faint press of something breathing underneath. I did not touch it. I opened the book by pressing the cover gently with the back of the pen, using the pen as a lever. The cover swung open without resistance. The first page was blank. The paper looked thick, hand-laid, cream-colored, the kind of paper a chemist in the 1830s would have kept for her ledger. I set the pen to the page. The ink went down clean. I wrote the first sentence, without pausing, in my ordinary hand. The Marchand bloodline is released from any obligation to this binding. Félicite Marchand is free. The bloodline anchor is severed. Above me, in the courtyard, I heard Félicité make a sound, not a sob, something smaller, a compression of breath that had been held for a long time. I wrote the second sentence without lifting the pen or pausing. This ledger is no longer bound to the cottage at 1114 Burgundy Street or to any land anywhere. The land anchor is dissolved. The cottage above me groaned, a deep structural sound that passed through the stone of the cistern walls and settled in my chest. Dust fell from the old mortar joints. I wrote the third sentence. The book did not slow me. The words went down at the same pace as the first 2, the ink steady, the pen moving over the paper without catch. This ledger shall no longer write futures. The hunger is ended. All claimed souls are released to rest. I put the period on the sentence. I did not lift the pen until the period was on the page. The darkness came out of the walls. It was not fog. It had shape. It came out of the fieldstone, and the floor, and the ceiling of the cistern chamber in loose strands, and then in tighter columns. And when it reached the middle of the chamber, I could see that there were faces in it, pressed close, thousands of them, and the faces were not looking at me. They were looking past me, up, towards something that was not in the chamber, something above and farther, something that had been waiting for them for a long time. The cold that came with them was not a temperature. It was the absence of a weight that had been holding them down. They passed through me and around me and did not harm me. They moved upward through the open cistern, and I watched them go, and the count I could not do, and the names I did not try to read, and after what felt like a few minutes but was probably longer, the last of them thinned, and the chamber was quiet again. The book in my hands was cold, the same temperature as the stone floor. I exhaled. I sat back on my heels. I thought it was done. I tried to stand up, and I could not. It was not that my legs failed. It was that something inside my chest had seated itself, low and quiet, and it had weight, and when I tried to rise, the weight did not rise with me. I felt it hook itself into the bones at the base of my neck. I felt it settle against the inside of my ribs. I felt my hands grow slightly warmer than the chamber, and looked at them in the flashlight beam and saw that the skin along the back of my right hand had a faint grain to it that had not been there an hour ago. The grain of cold-pressed paper, very fine, you would not have seen it in daylight. Above the cistern opening, Felicity's face appeared at the rim. She was more solid than she had been in the kitchen. She was nearly opaque, lit by the spill of the flashlight below, and she looked down at me with an expression that had no performance in it. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not say anything," she said. "I could not tell you. If I had told you, you would have refused, and everyone would have remained bound. The book would not allow severance unless severance was attempted by a marked carrier who did not know the transfer was mandatory. Mother set this rule into the original working. She knew a carrier who knew would not write the 3 sentences, and a carrier who did not know would write them cleanly and not hesitate. That is why I did not explain the full shape of the outcome. I am sorry." I looked at the book in my hands. The ink of my 3 sentences on the first page was bleeding, moving, the letters rearranging themselves on the page. I watched for a moment. The words that came up in place of my own were different, shorter, in a hand I recognized without having seen it before. It was my own hand, but older, settled, written with more confidence than I currently possessed. The new text said Nathan Alcott, keeper since November 7th, 2026. "I am going," she said. I looked up. She was fading at the edges, not the way a shape fades in the dark, the way a person fades when they are actually leaving, when the light around them simplifies because they are no longer holding themselves together for anyone. The bloodline anchor is severed, she said. The land anchor is dissolved. The book is no longer tied to my family or to this cottage. Those two pillars will not return. The third was not ended. It was moved. You are the hunger now. You will hold it. I cannot tell you how to hold it well. I can only tell you that I am sorry, and that the work of the carrier is to keep the damage narrow, and that I tried, and that you will try, and that the next carrier will try. That is what we do. She looked at me for one more moment. She looked like a young woman now, a young woman in 1854 who had gone down into a cistern to save her family and had not come back up. Her face had lost the paper quality entirely. She was, for 1 second, exactly the age she had been when she died. Then she was gone, and the light through the cistern opening narrowed and changed, and a faint warmth went through the stone above me that I felt more than heard. And I was alone in the chamber with a book in my hands and 3 sets of bones behind a broken brick wall, and the beginning of something seeding itself into my chest that I knew already was going to live there for a very long time. I put the book back in the wooden box. I closed the iron hasp. I carried the box and the flashlight up the stone steps and out into the courtyard. I slid the marble cap back over the cistern opening. I walked back into the kitchen. The French doors were still open. I closed them and locked them. The cottage was quiet. The lamps I had turned on were still burning. The oil lamp on the mantle was unlit. The leather ledger was open to the first blank page. My signature was there, Nathan Alcott, November 7th, 2026, in the black ink I had written it in. Beside it, in my own handwriting, in the same black ink, was a second line I had not written. It read, Nathan Alcott, keeper since November 7th, 2026. I picked up the ledger and closed it and set it back on the mantel stand. I tried to leave. I walked out the front door and down the stoop and across the brick passage to the iron gate. I reached for the latch. My hand went to it, and I felt the cold of the iron, and I opened the latch and stepped forward into the opening of the gate, and I did not cross it. I was in the passage on one side. I was also in the passage, on the same side. There was no other side. The sidewalk of Burgundy Street was visible through the gate, the street lamp, a man walking a small dog under the lamp, the dog stopping to sniff a planter, the man tugging the leash. I watched him from 3 feet away. He did not look up. He did not see me. He kept walking. The gate was open. I could not pass through it. I closed the gate. I walked back up the stoop. I went into the cottage and sat down at the writing desk in the front parlor. The dawn came. I watched it come through the window. The light changed from the deep purple of the last hours before sunrise to the gray of just before, to the rose of the first minute, to the ordinary honey of a November morning in the quarter. A street cleaner passed on Burgundy. A pair of women in hotel uniforms walked past, going to a shift somewhere. The city woke up the way it always does. I could see all of it. I could not participate in any of it. Around 10 in the morning, the front gate opened, and Camille came in. She was in her late 30s, tall, brown-haired, carrying a canvas bag full of cleaning supplies. She let herself in with her key. She called out hello to see if the guest was still there. I was 6 feet from her in the parlor. She did not see me. She did not hear me when I said her name. She worked through the cottage the way a host works. She stripped the bed in the loft. She wiped down the kitchen counter. She replaced the beignets in the fridge with a fresh plate, put fresh sparkling water in the fridge door, refreshed the welcome card. She did not alter anything else. She paused at the mantel and looked at the open ledger and smiled at my signature the way she would smile at any guest who had kept the tradition. She did not see the second line in my own handwriting. That line was only visible to whoever the book decided to show it to. Camille was not the audience. She picked up the rule card from the mantel where I had left it and tucked it back into the spine of the ledger. She did not unfold it. She set the ledger back on its stand. She left. The cottage was quiet. That was a month ago. I have watched the cottage turn over 6 times since then. 3 couples, 2 solo travelers, 1 family. None of them have been a candidate. The book has not shown itself to any of them. The rule card has stayed folded in the spine. The guests have signed the ledger and moved on and written their nice things in the house history notebook and driven back to wherever they came from. I have learned that the book is patient. It waits for the right signature. It has taken thousands over the years, but it does not take every guest. The pattern is specific. Something in the person, something the book recognizes, something I am starting to understand in the way that Felicite must have understood it by her 2nd or 3rd year. The book selects, Amelia Bro arrives tomorrow. I have seen the booking come through on Camille's tablet when Camille comes in to clean. Amelia has the instinct of a reporter and the grief of a missing friend, and those are the 2 things the book likes most in a signature. I have spent the last week trying to figure out what I can do. I can write in the mantle ledger now, which is useful. I have written a new rule into the folded card and tucked the card back into the spine. The rule says simply, do not sign, leave. I do not know if it will hold. The book has let me write the 6 original rules exactly as Felicite wrote them. It has let me add this one, so far. I do not know if it will remain on the card when Amelia unfolds it, or whether the book will scramble the letters at the last moment. I will find out tomorrow. I have also written a letter. It is sealed in an envelope and tucked behind the framed daguerreotype of Eulalie Marchand on the mantle. The letter is addressed to Rashida Bell at LSU, and it contains a set of instructions for finding the original working in the cistern, with the exact 3 sentences of severance written in my own hand, and specific warnings about the transfer mechanism that Felicite did not know how to articulate when she tried to help me. The letter assumes that Rashida will come looking for me eventually, because I told her to. I have not been able to place the letter anywhere a cleaning host would find it and pass it along. The mantle is the closest I can get. I hope she is thorough when she comes. She usually is. The 3rd thing I have done is this. I am telling you the story. I do not know how the story is reaching you, because I do not understand what has happened to me well enough to know what channels are still open. But I have written the story down in full, and I have written it with the intention that it will be heard by people who have not yet booked a cottage in the Quarter and are not yet thinking about the French Quarter at all. Because the book is patient, and because signatures are how it feeds, and because the only protection against being a signature is knowing what the ledger on the mantle actually is. If you ever rent a place in an old city, and you find a small folded card tucked into the binding of an old book on the mantle, do not follow the rules on it. Do not read it in the order it wants you to read it. Do not take the final rule as mercy. The rule about confession is bait. Confession is not available. The book does not accept the pen after the pen has been used. If you find a book like this, leave. Put the folded card back where it was. Pack your bag. Walk back to your car. Drive out of the parish. Do not sign anything on the way. If you are already signed, if the welcome card told you to, and you did it before you knew better, then the only route out is severance, and severance requires a carrier. That is me now. If you find me, or if you find another cottage with another keeper, understand that the keeper cannot save themselves. Only an unmarked outside party can write the 3 sentences cleanly, and only an unmarked party who has first become marked by signing, which is what I did, which is what Felicite did, which is what everyone who has carried this has done. The choice is real. It is not a good choice. I am sorry there is not a better one. Thank you for listening all the way through. I know this one was long, and I know parts of it will stay with you for a while. If the story did what I meant it to do, you will remember the rules the next time you see a small folded card in an old binding, and you will leave. If you want more stories like this one, subscribe to the channel. I have a new rules-based horror story every week, and there are more rooms like the one in this story than you would expect. Comment below and let me know if you have ever stayed somewhere and felt, even for a second, that the welcome note and the rules did not match. I read these carefully. I do not say that lightly. Rules exist for a reason. The reason is usually older than the rules are. Stay safe out there.